Chapter 1. The Dark Call. Rain fell torrentially that night, each drop seeming like a reminder of past mistakes. Detective Arthur Costa sat in his smoky office, illuminated only by the dim light of a desk lamp. The clock on the wall struck midnight when the phone rang, a piercing sound that shattered the silence. Arthur picked up the receiver with a steady hand, but his gaze betrayed deep fatigue. On the other end of the line, a desperate female voice pleaded for help. It was Helena Martins, a young journalist who had gotten herself into something far too big to handle alone. "Detective Costa, I'm in danger. They're after me. I need your help. Please, come quickly," said Helena, her voice trembling with fear. Arthur listened intently, recognizing the tone of someone truly in panic. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, knowing that time was crucial. Grabbing his hat and coat, he headed out to face the storm. Arriving at the agreed location, a rundown cafe in the city center, Arthur saw Helena sitting in a dark corner. Her eyes, wide with terror, met his as soon as he entered. She gestured frantically for him to sit. "Helena, you're safe now. Tell me what's happening," Arthur said, his voice calm and reassuring. Helena explained that she had been investigating a series of murders that seemed unconnected. However, she had discovered a dark pattern pointing to a conspiracy. Powerful people were involved, and now her life was at risk for knowing too much. "I managed to get some documents, evidence. They show that these murders are just the tip of the iceberg. There's something much bigger going on, and they'll do anything to silence me," Helena said, pushing a coffee-stained envelope towards Arthur. Arthur opened the envelope and saw photos, documents, and notes that clearly showed a pattern of corruption and manipulation. He knew this was just the beginning of something much darker. "I'll protect you, Helena, and I'll find out who's behind this. They won't go unpunished," Arthur said, his eyes shining with determination. As the rain continued to batter the cafe windows, Arthur and Helena planned their next steps. He knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, but the promise of justice was a powerful fuel for his scarred soul. Chapter 2. The Trail of Clues. The cold night wind caressed Arthur's face as he left the cafe, with Helena following closely. The city's streets were deserted, except for a few shadows that seemed to move furtively. The detective knew that each step they took led them deeper into a world of unknown dangers. "We need to be quick, Helena. They might be watching us," said Arthur, quickening his pace. They headed to Arthur's small apartment, where he knew they could analyze the evidence more safely. As soon as they entered, Arthur locked all the doors and windows, drew the curtains, and lit a small lamp on the work table. "Let's see what you've got," he said, spreading the documents and photos across the table. Helena began to explain the details of her investigation. There were names of influential figures, records of suspicious transactions, and obscure connections between the murder victims. Arthur scrutinized everything with a meticulous eye, his brain working at full speed to piece together the puzzle. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of notes. "These dates coincide with important events in the city. It seems these murders are carefully planned to divert attention." Helena nodded, admiring Arthur's ability to identify hidden patterns. "I was about to meet a key witness, an informant who could give us more information, but he disappeared before I could talk to him. We need to find him. He might be the key to uncovering this conspiracy," replied Arthur. He picked up the phone and made a quick call to one of his contacts in the police. "Ramirez, I need a favor. I'm looking for a guy who might have information about the recent murders. His name is Carlos Mendez. Anything you find, let me know," Arthur said, before hanging up. While they awaited Ramirez's response, Arthur and Helena began mapping out the connections. The apartment wall was soon covered with photos, documents, and red strings linking the dots. The atmosphere was charged with tension and determination. Suddenly, the phone rang again. It was Ramirez. "Arthur, I found some information on Mendez. He was last seen at an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. But be careful. I've heard the place is being watched by goons." Arthur thanked him and hung up. "Helena, I think we have a destination. Let's head to the warehouse, but we need to be prepared for anything." Armed with courage and an unwavering sense of justice, they left the apartment and headed to the industrial district. The path was dark, illuminated only by the occasional passing car headlights. The warehouse loomed in the distance, an imposing and threatening structure. "Stay behind me and keep quiet," Arthur whispered as they approached the building. They crept through the shadows, each step a mix of caution and determination. As they neared the entrance, Arthur saw two shadowy figures standing guard. With a swift strategy, he silently incapacitated them, ensuring safe entry for himself and Helena. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of stacked boxes and dark corridors. They moved carefully, listening for any sound that might betray Carlos Mendez's presence. Finally, they heard a muffled groan coming from a dark corner. There was Mendez, tied up and gagged, clearly battered. Arthur rushed to him, quickly untying him. "Mendez, we're here to help. What do you know about the murders?" Arthur asked. Mendez, still gasping and weak, managed to whisper, It's a corruption network, much bigger than we imagined. You need to stop the leader." Before he could continue, a noise behind them made Arthur turn quickly. The entrance was blocked by more goons, and the fight for survival began. Chapter 3. The Ambush. Arthur barely had time to react before the thugs lunged at him and Helena. The sound of punches and grunts echoed through the warehouse, mixed with the clatter of falling boxes and creaking wood. Arthur, with the experience of a combat veteran, moved with precision, taking down his attackers one by one. Helena, despite her fear, fought bravely by his side. "Hold on, Helena. We'll get through this," shouted Arthur as he dodged a punch and countered with a precise blow. One of the thugs managed to grab Helena by the arm, but she broke free with a quick move and brought him down with a well-placed strike to the knee. Seeing an opportunity, Arthur grabbed a piece of metal pipe and delivered a powerful blow to the last of the assailants, who fell unconscious to the ground. Arthur's breathing was heavy, but his mind was clear. They needed to get out of there quickly before more reinforcements arrived. He turned to Carlos Mendez, still gasping and battered. "Mendez, we're getting you out of here. Can you walk?" Arthur asked. Mendez nodded with difficulty. "Yes, I can, but we have to be quick." Arthur helped Mendez to his feet, and the three carefully made their way to the warehouse exit. The night outside was still cold and dark, but the rain had stopped, leaving a tense silence in the air. They slinked through the shadows, avoiding any possible watchmen lurking about. "We need to get Mendez to a safe place. He knows too much, and they'll keep coming after him," said Helena, looking worriedly at Arthur. Arthur knew she was right. They needed a secure refuge where they could protect Mendez and plan their next steps. "I know a place, an old house outside the city. We'll go there and continue the investigation from there." Carefully, they placed Mendez in Arthur's car and set off towards the outskirts of the city. The silence inside the car was heavy, each person immersed in their own thoughts and concerns. Finally, they reached the old house, a sturdy, isolated structure surrounded by tall, dense trees. So Arthur helped Mendez inside and laid him on an old but comfortable sofa. "Rest a bit, Mendez. We'll take care of you, and then you can tell us everything you know." Helena prepared some water and food, while Arthur locked all the doors and windows, ensuring they were secure. The old house creaked with the wind, but it was the best refuge they could have at that moment. After a while, Mendez finally began to speak. His voice was weak but laden with urgency. "The conspiracy goes beyond the murders. It's a network of influence peddling, money laundering, corruption at all levels. They have eyes and ears all over the city." Arthur and Helena listened intently, each word from Mendez confirming their suspicions and adding new details to the puzzle. They knew they were up against something much bigger than they could have imagined, but they also knew they couldn't give up. "Who's in charge, Mendez? We need a name," insisted Arthur, the tension in his voice evident. Mendez looked directly into Arthur's eyes. "The name you're looking for is Alvaro Salazar. He's the leader, the mastermind behind it all. But be careful, he's dangerous, and has many resources at his disposal." Arthur nodded, knowing that this information was valuable, but also placed them in even greater danger. "We'll take him down, Mendez. For you, for all the victims, and for justice." As the night wore on, Arthur, Helena, and Mendez continued to plan, aware that the path ahead would be full of challenges and dangers. But with Arthur's unwavering determination and Helena's bravery, they knew they could face anything that came their way. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Shadows. The early morning hours dragged on in the isolated old house. The wind blew through the trees, making them whisper ancient secrets. Inside, Arthur and Helena were hunched over a table, illuminated only by a solitary lamp, while Carlos Mendez rested on the sofa, still pale and exhausted. "Salazar is the name we were looking for, Helena. But we need more evidence to bring him down," Arthur said, his voice firm but low to avoid waking Mendez. "We have to be meticulous, Arthur. Salazar won't leave traces easily," replied Helena, running her fingers over the notes scattered across the table. Arthur nodded in agreement and stood up. "I'll contact a few more informants. We need to know where he hides, where he keeps his secrets." While Arthur made a few quick calls, Helena took the opportunity to organize the documents. She focused on the details, searching for patterns and connections that might have been overlooked. Her eyes shone with determination, a reflection of the courage that kept her going. Arthur hung up the phone and turned to Helena. "One of my contacts mentioned a nightclub where Salazar often meets his allies. It's a place called The Moonlight. We need to go there and see what we can find out." Helena nodded, already preparing her mind for the new mission. "Let's do it. But we need to be cautious. Salazar will have men everywhere." Leaving Mendez resting in the safe house, Arthur and Helena headed towards the city center. The club, The Moonlight, was known for its glamour and exclusive clientele, but Arthur knew that behind the velvet curtains and bright lights, dirty deals were being made. Arriving at the club, Arthur wore an elegant black suit and Helena a stunning dress that made her look part of the luxurious scene. They entered, blending in with the crowd of the rich and powerful, but their eyes were alert, searching for any sign of Salazar or his men. "Let's split up. Keep an eye out and stay in touch, Helena," said Arthur, handing Helena a small radio. Helena moved gracefully through the hall, observing and listening to the conversations around her. Arthur did the same, discreetly approaching some acquaintances and old informants who might have leads. Finally, his eyes caught a familiar figure, one of the thugs they had faced in the warehouse. He was talking to a man with graying hair and a cold gaze. It was Salazar. Arthur followed carefully, keeping his distance but close enough to hear parts of the conversation. Salazar was talking about an important delivery that was to take place soon. This could be the proof they needed. Suddenly, a burly security guard placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "You shouldn't be here," the man said in a threatening tone. Arthur smiled slightly. "I'm just enjoying the night. Is there a problem?" Before the guard could respond, Helena appeared next to Arthur, holding a glass of champagne. "Darling, I've been looking for you. Shall we dance?" The distraction was enough to ward off the guard, and Arthur followed Helena to the dance floor. As they danced, he whispered, "Salazar mentioned an important delivery. We need to find out more about it." Helena nodded, her eyes shining with excitement. "Let's follow him until we find out what's going on." The soft music and twinkling lights of the club created an illusion of safety, but Arthur and Helena knew they were in the enemy's lair. They discreetly followed Salazar to a private room at the back of the club. Hidden in the shadows, they overheard more details about the delivery, a shipment of incriminating documents that could bring down several corrupt politicians. "We need to intercept that, Arthur. It's our chance," said Helena, gripping Arthur's arm firmly. Arthur agreed. "We'll plan this carefully. We can't afford to fail." With a plan in mind, they left the club with confident steps, ready for the next phase of their dangerous mission. The path ahead was risky, but the promise of justice was a beacon guiding them through the darkness. Chapter 5. The Night of the Delivery. The night was dark and charged with palpable tension. Arthur and Helena, now more determined than ever, prepared to intercept the crucial delivery mentioned by Salazar. The plan was risky, but they had no choice. They needed the evidence to bring down the conspiracy. "Helena, we need to be quick and precise. If anything goes wrong, our lives will be on the line," said Arthur, checking his pistol and adjusting his disguise. Helena nodded, her eyes locked on Arthur's. "We're in this together, Arthur. Let's take them down." They headed to the delivery location, an abandoned warehouse near the docks. The cold sea wind hit their faces as they hid in the shadows, observing the movements of Salazar's thugs. The men were loading boxes into the warehouse, clearly nervous and alert to any sign of intruders. Arthur and Helena waited for the right moment to act. When one of the thugs stepped away to smoke, Arthur seized the opportunity to approach stealthily and silently incapacitate him. Helena did the same with another guard, moving with the precision of a panther. "Let's go in," Arthur whispered, and they slipped into the warehouse. The interior was dimly lit, with only a few lamps hanging from the ceiling, casting long, threatening shadows. In the center, a large table was covered with documents and boxes. Salazar was there, surrounded by his men, examining the papers with a keen eye. Arthur and Helena positioned themselves behind a stack of crates, watching every move. They needed to wait for the exact moment to strike and grab the documents. Time seemed to drag, each second an eternity. Finally, Salazar picked up one of the documents and began to speak. "These papers will ensure no one interferes with our business. We have everything we need to control this city." Arthur knew they couldn't wait any longer. He signaled to Helena, and the two advanced swiftly, catching the thugs by surprise. Helena disarmed one of the men with a quick strike, while Arthur immobilized another. Salazar, caught off guard, tried to flee, but Arthur was quicker. "Where do you think you're going, Salazar?" Arthur said, grabbing him by the collar. "Your party's over," Salazar sneered. "You think you can stop me, Costa? I'm untouchable." "We'll see about that," Arthur replied, throwing Salazar against the table and grabbing the documents. "We have everything we need to bring you down." Suddenly, a gunshot echoed through the warehouse, and Arthur felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. He staggered but didn't let go of Salazar. Helena ran to help him, but more shots were fired. The remaining thugs were fighting back. "Arthur, we need to get out of here," Helena shouted, helping him to his feet as he clutched the wound. With the documents in hand and Salazar in custody, they began to retreat, moving quickly through the shadows and using the crates as cover. The gunfire continued, but Arthur and Helena's determination was unwavering. They knew justice was within reach. Finally, they managed to exit the warehouse and ran to the car. Helena helped Arthur into the passenger seat while he held the documents tightly. Salazar was tied up and thrown in the back seat, powerless. "We did it, Arthur. Now we have to get this to the authorities, Heller." "Tatradinchi Siugs Gela, Dodandai Dasailat, Delat." Starting the car and speeding away from the docks, Arthur, despite his injury, smiled. "Yes, Helena, we're almost there. Salazar will pay for everything he's done." As they drove off into the darkness of the night, they knew the battle wasn't over yet, but they were closer than ever to exposing the truth and bringing justice to all those who had suffered at the hands of Salazar and his corruption network. Chapter 6. The Unlikely Alliance. The pain in Arthur's shoulder was intense, but he couldn't afford to stop. Helena drove the car with precision and urgency, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. Salazar, tied up in the back seat, glared at them with a mixture of anger and contempt. "You won't succeed. My connections are too powerful for two fools like you," snarled Salazar, struggling against his restraints. Arthur turned to him, the pain evident on his face, but determination shining in his eyes. "Shut up, Salazar. Your corruption network is about to crumble." Helena, trying to stay calm, looked at Arthur. "We need a doctor. You're losing a lot of blood." Arthur knew she was right, but also knew that getting Salazar and the documents to a safe place was the priority. "There's a place. An old friend, Dr. Moreira. He can help us without asking questions." Helena sped towards Dr. Moreira's clinic, a veteran doctor who owed Arthur an old debt. When they arrived, the doctor received them with urgency, taking Arthur inside while Helena watched over Salazar in the car. "What happened this time, Arthur?" Dr. Moreira asked, as he prepared the instruments to remove the bullet and treat the wound. "A long story, Doctor, but we've got Salazar and the evidence to bring him down," replied Arthur, suppressing a groan of pain. While the doctor worked quickly, Helena entered with a worried expression. "Arthur, we need to move. We can't stay here long." Arthur nodded, enduring the pain. "We're almost ready. Just a few more minutes." After the treatment, Arthur thanked Dr. Moreira and, with difficulty, returned to the car. They headed towards a temporary hideout where they could calmly analyze the documents and plan their next steps. Arriving at the hideout, a small house on the outskirts of the city, Helena and Arthur secured Salazar in a chair and began reviewing the papers. The evidence was damning: illegal transactions, bribes, and a list of names that included high-ranking figures. "We have enough to expose all of this, Arthur. But we need help. We can't do this alone," said Helena, her voice laden with worry. Arthur agreed, knowing they were on dangerous ground. "I'll contact an old ally, someone who still has integrity in the police. We need protection and a strategy to publicize this information." Arthur picked up the phone and called Captain Duarte, a veteran policeman who had worked with him years ago and still had a reputation for honesty. "Duarte, it's Arthur. I need your help. I have evidence against Salazar and his network, but we're in danger. Can you meet us at the address I'll give you?" Duarte, recognizing the urgency in Arthur's voice, agreed to meet them. "I'll be there soon, Arthur. Stay safe." While they waited, Helena looked at Arthur with a mix of admiration and concern. "You really believe we can do this, don't you?" Arthur, with a tired smile, held her hand. "We've come this far, Helena. We can't give up now. We're going to expose this conspiracy and bring justice to everyone." Minutes later, a car pulled up in front of the house, and Duarte quickly entered, his expression grave. "Arthur, Helena, we need to act fast. Salazar has many allies who won't hesitate to come after you." Arthur handed the documents to Duarte. "Take these to the prosecutor. We need an operation to arrest everyone involved and protect Mendez. He's our key witness." Duarte nodded, taking the papers. "Leave it to me. I'll make sure this gets into the right hands. You two stay hidden until it's safe." With a plan in action and reliable allies by their side, Arthur and Helena knew they were close to a crucial victory. But they also knew that the final battle was still ahead, and they needed to be ready to face anything. Chapter 7. The net close's morning was approaching, bringing with it a pale light that seeped through the cracks in the curtains of their hideout. Arthur, still feeling the pain from his wound, was determined to carry on. Helena had not slept, her eyes fixed on the door, ready for anything. "Arthur, we have to be prepared. Salazar won't give up easily," she said, breaking the tense silence. Arthur nodded, his mind racing. "We need to move. Captain Duarte is trustworthy, but we can't just sit here waiting for everything to resolve itself." Salazar, tied to the chair, watched them with a cold, calculating gaze. "You think this will work?" My men are everywhere. You won't escape. Helena, unfazed, replied, Justice always finds a way, Salazar, and you're going to pay for everything. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires outside interrupted their conversation. Arthur quickly got up, ignoring the pain, and went to the window. He saw 3 black cars parked at the entrance, armed men emerging from them. Damn, they found us. Helena, grab Salazar. We're going out the back, Arthur ordered. With speed and precision, Helena untied Salazar just enough to allow him to move without escaping, while Arthur grabbed his pistol and the remaining documents. They exited through the back door, moving swiftly across the rugged terrain surrounding the house. The sound of heavy footsteps and angry voices grew closer. Arthur knew they were at a disadvantage, but adrenaline and the need for justice kept him focused. He led Helena and Salazar along a narrow path that led to an old, abandoned railway maintenance shed. Inside! We'll use this to hide temporarily, Arthur said, pointing to the shed. They entered the dark and dusty shed, locking the door behind them. They could hear Salazar's men approaching, searching every corner. Arthur knew they couldn't stay there for long. They needed a plan to escape. Helena, we need to create a distraction. You and Salazar stay here. I'll try to draw them away, Arthur said, preparing to leave. Helena grabbed his arm, her eyes full of concern. Arthur, don't do this. It's too dangerous. Arthur smiled slightly, the unshakable determination in his gaze. Trust me, we'll get through this. He slipped out the side door, moving silently through the shadows. He picked up an iron bar and, with a strong blow, created a loud noise that echoed through the shed. Salazar's men, alerted by the sound, ran in the opposite direction, giving Helena and Salazar a chance to move. Helena took advantage of the opportunity, holding Salazar tightly and moving out of the shed through the opposite exit. Arthur, seeing that the plan had worked, quickly rejoined them, and together they ran towards the abandoned railway line that stretched behind the shed. The rusty tracks guided them away from immediate danger, but Arthur knew they couldn't relax yet. They needed a definitive plan to expose Salazar and ensure he was arrested. We have to get to the prosecutor as soon as possible. Duarte said he'd meet us at the decommissioned train station. Let's head there, Arthur said, breathing heavily. After a tense walk, they arrived at the decommissioned station. It was a place forgotten by time, with graffiti covering the walls and vegetation taking over what was left of the platforms. But for Arthur and Helena, it was a temporary refuge, a meeting point with hope. Duarte arrived shortly after, with a team of trustworthy police officers. Arthur, Helena, let's make sure this ends now. Salazar will be arrested, and these documents will be the proof we need. Arthur handed the documents to Duarte, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. Make sure justice is served, Duarte. We're counting on you. Duarte nodded, his eyes firm and determined. Leave it to me. We'll take Salazar and these documents straight to the police headquarters. As Salazar was handcuffed and taken away by the officers, Arthur and Helena embraced, relieved to have survived another day. They knew the fight wasn't completely over, but they were closer than ever to seeing justice prevail. Chapter 8. The Final Siege. The sun began to rise on the horizon, casting a golden light over the decommissioned train station. Arthur and Helena, exhausted but determined, watched as Salazar was taken away by Duarte's police. The sense of triumph hung in the air, but Arthur knew there was still work to be done. Duarte, you have to make sure these documents get to the prosecutor and that Mendez is safe. Without him, the whole case could fall apart, Arthur said, his tone grave. Duarte nodded, the seriousness in his eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. Leave it to me, Arthur. I'll personally deliver everything. You two should lay low for now. There could still be retaliation. Arthur and Helena agreed, knowing the shadow of the conspiracy still loomed over them. They needed to step back and let Duarte handle his part. They headed to a car Duarte had provided, a discreet vehicle that would take them to a safe hideout outside the city. As they drove along deserted roads, Arthur and Helena reflected on everything they had been through. "Do you really think we did it, Arthur?" Helena asked, her voice filled with exhaustion and hope. "We can't let our guard down yet, Helena. Salazar has many allies. But we took a big step today. We need to have faith in Duarte and the justice system," Arthur replied, keeping his eyes on the road. Hours later, they arrived at a small cabin in the mountains, isolated and peaceful. It was the perfect place to hide while the dust settled. Arthur ensured everything was secure, checking doors and windows before allowing them both to rest. The following days were a mix of anxiety and waiting. Every noise outside the cabin, every movement in the brush, made their hearts race. But they knew it was necessary to stay calm and vigilant. Then, on a cold morning, a knock at the door roused them from their thoughts. Arthur grabbed his gun and approached cautiously. "Who is it?" he asked, his voice firm. "It's me, Duarte. Open the door," came the steady response. Arthur opened the door and saw Duarte standing there with an expression of fatigue and satisfaction. "We did it, Arthur. Salazar is in custody, and the documents have been accepted as evidence. Mendes is under protection, and the prosecutor has already started actions against the others involved." Helena let out a sigh of relief, embracing Arthur. "Finally, we did it." Duarte entered and sat down, exhausted but relieved. "You two did an incredible job. It will take time, but justice will be served." Arthur, despite the relief, still had a shadow of concern. "What about us, Duarte? Are we still in danger?" Duarte looked at them seriously. "You'll need to stay out of sight for a while, but I'll make sure you're protected. You are heroes in this story, and what you did won't be forgotten." Arthur nodded, holding Helena's hand. "Thank you, Duarte, for everything." Duarte smiled slightly. "Take care, Arthur. Helena, you deserve some peace now." With that, Duarte bid them farewell, leaving Arthur and Helena in the cabin. They knew the path ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time in a long while, they felt that justice was on their side. The conspiracy had been dismantled, and the promise of a fairer future brightened their hearts. As the sun set over the mountains, Arthur and Helena sat on the cabin's porch, watching the tranquility around them. They knew that together they could face anything the future held. Chapter 9. The Final Act. Twilight cast long shadows over the mountain cabin. Arthur and Helena savored a rare moment of peace as they watched the sunset, but their calm was abruptly interrupted by the insistent ringing of the emergency phone that Duarte had left them. Arthur answered, his expression hardening as he heard the voice of the prosecutor on the other end of the line. "Costa, we have a problem. Someone inside the system is trying to sabotage the case. We need you and Helena to come to the city immediately. This might be our last chance to ensure Salazar doesn't escape." Arthur hung up the phone and looked at Helena. "We have to go, Helena. The fight isn't over yet." They gathered their things and left quickly, driving down the winding mountain roads to the city, where the tension was palpable. They arrived at the prosecutor's office under the cover of night, avoiding curious eyes, and entering through the back doors. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with tired but determined features, welcomed them into his office. "We have enough evidence, but someone is tampering with the files and trying to destroy the proof. I need you to help secure everything until the trial." Arthur and Helena agreed and set to work, reviewing documents, checking files, and ensuring nothing was lost. Time was short, and every minute counted. As they worked, Arthur noticed a strange movement outside the window. "Helena, we have company." Helena looked out the window and saw armed men approaching the building. "They've come to silence us. We need to act fast." Arthur grabbed his gun, and together with Helena and the prosecutor, they prepared for the invasion. Salazar's thugs broke through the door but were met with fierce resistance. Arthur, moving with the precision of a veteran, disarmed one of the men, while Helena took down another with a combination of wit and bravery. The prosecutor, though not a man of action, showed admirable courage, helping to keep the intruders at bay. Gunshots echoed through the hallways, mixed with the sound of breaking glass and muffled screams. Finally, after an intense fight, Arthur and Helena managed to subdue the remaining thugs, tying them up to ensure they could cause no more harm. The prosecutor, panting, looked at Arthur. "You did a great job, but it's not over yet. We need to protect these documents and ensure the trial happens tomorrow." Arthur nodded, the determination shining in his eyes. "We'll take everything to a safe place. Duarte is waiting with a team of trustworthy officers." With the documents in hand, Arthur and Helena, accompanied by the prosecutor, left the building and headed to the meeting point. Duarte was there, with a team ready to escort them to the courthouse. They knew the final battle was imminent, but they were prepared to face any challenge. The next day, the courthouse was packed. Journalists, onlookers, and Salazar's allies filled the space, creating a tense atmosphere. Arthur and Helena sat next to the prosecutor, watching as the trial began. The evidence was presented, testimonies were heard, and Salazar's defense tried everything to discredit the evidence. But the truth was powerful, and Arthur and Helena's determination was unyielding. Finally, the verdict was given. Salazar was found guilty of all charges. The room erupted in murmurs and varied reactions, but Arthur and Helena knew that justice had prevailed. As Salazar was led away in handcuffs, Arthur looked at Helena, a sense of relief and satisfaction flooding his being. "We did it, Helena. We achieved justice." Helena smiled, holding Arthur's hand. "Yes, Arthur. We did what was right. And now, we can finally move on." The sun shone brightly outside the courthouse, illuminating the city with new hope. Arthur and Helena, together, left the courthouse knowing that despite all the difficulties, they had triumphed. The conspiracy had been dismantled, and the promise of a fairer future was finally a reality. Chapter 10. The new Don Salazar's trial had come to an end, but the city was still shrouded in a tense atmosphere. The streets, once dark and oppressive, now seemed on the verge of a new beginning. Arthur and Helena, despite their victory, knew they needed to remain vigilant. After the verdict, they left the courthouse to a wave of applause and admiring looks. Ordinary people, who had suffered under Salazar's corruption network, now saw in them a symbol of hope and justice. But Arthur felt that his work was still not complete. Back at their detective agency, Arthur and Helena began organizing the remaining information. Many of Salazar's accomplices were still at large, and Arthur wouldn't rest until all were brought to justice. One afternoon, while reviewing the last files, Helena found something intriguing. "Arthur, look at this. It seems Salazar kept a personal diary. It might hold more secrets about the network." Arthur took the diary, its leather worn and pages yellowed with age. If he kept personal records, it could be the key to dismantling the rest of the operation. They spent hours reading the diary, finding names, locations, and transactions that had not yet been revealed. Each turned page brought them a step closer to ridding the city of the remaining shadows. Days later, while investigating one of the locations mentioned in the diary, an old warehouse at the port, they found evidence of one last operation in progress. Crates filled with forged documents, dirty money, and weapons were hidden there. Salazar, even imprisoned, still had tentacles in the underworld. Arthur and Helena quickly called Duarte and his team, who arrived at the scene and began confiscating everything. While the police worked, Arthur looked at Helena. "This could be the last piece of the puzzle. If we can dismantle this operation, the city can finally breathe easy." Suddenly a gunshot echoed in the warehouse, and a bullet grazed Arthur's arm. He quickly turned, seeing one of Salazar's thugs making a desperate last stand. Arthur and Duarte sprang into action, subduing the man before he could cause more harm. Arthur, holding his wounded arm, smiled at Helena. "It seems they don't want to leave us in peace so easily." Helena returned the smile, relieved. "But we'll keep fighting, Arthur, until the end." With the final operation dismantled and the evidence handed over to the authorities, Arthur and Helena finally felt they could rest. The city, once suffocated by corruption, began to show signs of recovery. People walked the streets with renewed vigor, confident that justice had prevailed. One night, as they stood on the agency's balcony, watching the city's lights, Arthur turned to Helena. "You did an amazing job, Helena. I couldn't have done this without you." Helena smiled, her eyes shining under the stars. "And I couldn't have done it without you, Arthur. We're a good team." They toasted with glasses of whiskey, celebrating their victory and the future that now seemed more promising. The night wind carried a sense of renewal, and they knew that while there was still much to be done, the greatest battle had been won. As the city slept under a starry sky, Arthur and Helena, side by side, were ready to face any challenge the future might bring. They knew that justice never rests, and neither would they.